Episode 3, Sketch-to-Animatic. So before we continue moving forward from where we left off, let's look at the pipeline we've covered so far here. So here's an overview of the animation pipeline, going from the scripts all the way to the final cuts. So in the last episode, we had focused on taking the script and turning it into thumbnails, which is the rough draft of ideas of sequences based on what was written in the script, which I think is the beginnings of the most important part of the process in production, as well as it being a worthwhile episode. I don't think I'll be able to cover everything in this episode, learning from what I was editing in the previous episode, becoming too long that it will just exceed the limit that Instagram would allow me and leaving me panicking. So to avoid falling into the issue again, I'll divide this episode into another two-parter so that I'm able to upload these recordings onto my Instagram page. So for the last week now, I've been focusing on recording the progress of my storyboarding process and editing together what is known as an animatic. This is the stage where I feel I really have something to follow through from that I can now evolve. And the idea itself that I took from the influences and references begins to take shape and it becomes its own thing. And where we go next from there will cover a huge chunk of work and a big leap forward in setting up the foundations of the project. Like I did last time, let's go through an overview of what I'll be covering in the next two episodes. So what we'll be going through is I'm going to be refining my thumbnails into clearer and more concise storyboards, then exporting the finished boards out of Photoshop and then chucking them into the edits using Premiere Pro, which is the editing program I've been using for a good almost 6 years now. The things I'll be utilizing in the edits are the storyboard frames, which have been prepared as a bunch of JPEGs and allocated folders. There has been recorded voiceover work of the characters provided by myself and a couple of friends of mine who are aspiring actors, who I had the pleasure of directing, as well as meticulously using an array of sound effects and music I've gathered from the internet. So all these items in this shopping list here are what is going to help me create a finished animatic by the end of all of this. So on this journey, we'll be going from storyboard to animatic, which I think is a pretty significant step forward. So now, let's continue where we left off. Before I began recording, I'll have you know that I've broken up the scenes into individual PSD files, which is what I'll recommend whenever you storyboard using Photoshop, as having a large chunk of thumbnails that I showed you will cause the PSD file to chug. Knowing from experience that if you were to continue evolving them into more detailed boards and add in more frames, it will just cause the file to chug even more until it eventually crashes. So it only makes sense to break up the scenes into individual PSD files with all the shots that make up one scene, so I can continue to move forward into the next stage. I'm going to go through scenes 2 and 3. I'm saving scene 1's frames for when we go through editing, as there's nothing much that happens involving characters or anything of the techniques that I wish to cover with you that are considered important to the role of a storyboard artist. The opening scene is very much just setup, and I think that would be more interesting to go through those frames in the edit, as it requires some technical stuff and some fancy camera work that I want to do with it. So it would be worthwhile seeing the opening scene come to life through that. These two scenes are a lot simpler and I think fair to any beginners here watching who would want to learn storyboarding in Photoshop. So that makes a good basis as a starting palette. I don't think I need to go over refining the thumbnails for every scene, as it will just become counterintuitive and very rinse and repeat. I think just showing you refining my storyboards in just 2 of my scenes is enough to gain a grasp of the essential tools and the method which I'll cover with you, as well as problem solving, which I'll come across as we're going through just 2 scenes. So let's open the scene 2 file. Okay. So here are all the thumbnails that cover the entire scene here. I'm just going to switch these thumbnails off and leave the first one on, which is the shot that begins the scene. So if you can recall in how the story plays out, we had just whip panned from the end of the one take from scene 1 to the first shot of scene 2, which is a tight medium shot of Marty wincing, grunting, and what looks like he is pulling onto something. So to solve the problem in making this shot clear, is we are going to add a bit of animation to it. More specifically, we are going to keyframe the action to convey clarity in what is happening. So first thing I'm going to do before we get our head down into the drawing is we are going to go to Window, scroll down to Layer Comp, and that'll open a little tab here. We'll get to why we're going to need that in a bit, but this is a handy tool that will help us later in the process here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to where it says opacity here on the middle right, just above the layers. And I'm just going to lower the opacity of the thumbnail by half, somewhere about 50, maybe 43%. As you see, as I'm lowering the opacity, the thumbnail begins to phase out. Yeah, that looks about okay. So I'll show you why I did that. I'm going to add a new layer above the thumbnail, and I'm going to draw over my thumbnail in this new layer to sharpen the line work a bit. Even though I'm drawing, I'm keeping it loose and not make it too detailed. It doesn't need to be overly detailed. In the real world, working as a storyboard artist, you don't really have a great deal of time to make it as detailed as you want. And honestly, storyboards don't need to be overly detailed or overly animated. Just clear enough to convey your employers or whoever you are pitching it to can understand what is going on in your sequence. It's not about how well you draw, it's about how well you are able to visually convey story. And you'll be surprised how much the role of storyboarding is sometimes misinterpreted regarding its purpose. Just doing some finishing touches on the line to make it clear. Like so. And now I have a more refined version of the line work. Another thing I'm going to do is add another layer beneath this new drawing. Then I'm going to change the color of my pen tool from black to light grey. Yeah, somewhere around here is fine. Then I'm going to enlarge my brush. And then I'm going to shade a grey tone inside my line work. This is just to make the drawing stand out and make it more noticeable, especially if you have a shot where the characters are placed against the environment or set piece. I think I'll enlarge the brush slightly more. I'm also going to revert the size of my brush back, and I'm going to use white, and I'm going to add highlights to some of the edges of the drawing to mimic where the light is coming from. Some detail to add depth to the drawing. Let's whiten these teeth here. Then, once you are satisfied with your drawing, we are going to go to the Layer Comp tab and press the little plus emblem below the tab here. And another tab will pop up. And I'm going to give it an appropriate name convention here. So we're going to call it SC, which is scene, _ 002 _ SH, which is shot, _ 010 _ 001. Then press OK. And now on the tab, you can see that the name of the layer has been keyed here. Just going to name the layer that has the line work here. 001. Again, we'll return to why using layer comp is so important in a bit, bear with. So what we're going to do next is we are going to add another key drawing. We're going to do a bit of animation to the drawing to add some emphasis that Marty is struggling. So we're going to right click on the layer, then scroll up to where it says duplicates layer, and a tab will come up where it is telling us that it is making a copy of the layer you have chosen to duplicate. Since this is a second drawing to the shots, let's rename it from 001 to 002, like so. Turn the original layer off. Then I'm going to use the lasso tool here, and then cut around Marty's head, then hold Control and press T, and then I'm going to rotate his head back. And then I'm going to use the lasso tool again, and just going to rotate Marty's body slightly back. Revert color back to black, decrease the size of the brush, fill in these gaps here. Then we're going to duplicate the tone layer, name the tone _ 002. Now, we're going to move this duplicated tone layer and match it with Marty's second pose here. Now I'm just going to erase some areas of it and fix a few details here. Change the brush size, fill in this, fill in that, and fix the highlights. Now I'm going to go to the Layer Comp tab again, Press the plus logo emblem. Name it Scene 2, Shot 10,002. Now, if you go to these two arrows here at the bottom left of the Layer Comp tab, you can see it's flicking through the two drawings. Now we've added a bit of animation to the shots. We can see Marty's action more concisely just by adding an additional drawing. I think we can make that bit of action a bit more expressive, I think. Just going to hold down Alt and highlight the second layer of the line work in grey tone. I'm just going to rotate it back a bit more. Move it back slightly, do a quick little bit of fixing. Go to the circling arrow emblem in the layer comp to update the keyed layer. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think that's a lot better. Okay, before we move on to the next shots, I'm just going to do some housekeeping here. Just going to pile these layers of this shot into a folder. Hold down the Alt key and press onto the layers to the shots. Then going down to this folder emblem below the layers, click on it, and it will create a folder containing all the layers that make up the shots. It's going to name this folder Scene 2 Shot 10. And this just prevents getting overwhelmed with a long list of layers that you will find yourself adding as you continue working through your shots. And it just makes things easier to find. And now we've finalized storyboarding the shots. We've taken the original thumbnail, added a new layer over to refine it. We added some grey tone, some highlights, some animation to it, and now the shot itself is a lot clearer. That's one shot done. Let's go to the next shot. Same thing as we did with the previous shots. Lower the opacity, add a new layer over the thumbnail, draw over. Okay, name it. I'm also going to add another layer to draw over the suitcase behind her. Name this layer Suitcase. Then once you're happy with the line work, get rid of the thumbnail I no longer need. Just sharpen some of the line work here. Add new layer beneath the drawing. Name that Tone 001. Enlarge the brush size. Grey tone. Decrease size. Add some white highlights. The same as I did with the line work, I'm going to add an additional slightly darker grey tone layer behind the suitcase. The same as I did with the line work for Selma, I'm going to add an additional slightly darker grey tone layer behind for the suitcase. Now you can see why using grey tones is important here. It just breaks those drawings up. And like I said, adds depth to making the characters stand out and make them more noticeable when putting them up against whatever is in the background. Don't forget to name your layers. So this solves another creative problem when I want to add another frame to add an additional drawing of another pose to show that Selma is struggling to trying to pull the suitcase without affecting any pieces of line work that I don't want affected. Before I add another layer comp to the shots, I'm going to duplicate the line work of Selma and place it above. I'm going to turn off this first layer and I'm going to use the lasso tool, cut around her fringe here, Control T. I'm just going to animate a bit of motion in the hair just to give the impression of speed and when she pulls herself back in her struggle. Cut around the head, Control T, and rotate her head around forward slightly, reposition it a little. Then the same thing, lasso tool her body, and I'm going to rotate the whole thing forward. Let's fix the line work. Duplicate her tone layer and match it to the additional line drawing. Fix the highlights. Turn the suitcase tone layer back on. Then I'm going to key a layer comp of what is her first pose. Name it Scene 2, Shot 20,001. Switch back to the drawing, which is her finishing pose for this shot. And her grey tone. Key that in the layer comp. Name it. And we've added some animation to this shot. So very much I do the same thing with every other shot, but using the initiative with the creative problem solving that I may come across when I'm storyboarding, such as how many layers you need to break up what's in the shots, tones, and how many additional drawings required to make sense of what you are trying to get across in each sequence. Overall, I'm going to be doing the same thing with the other shots in this scene like I've done with the first two. I don't feel I need to keep repeating the process of my method here, so I'm just going to time-lapse through this and cut to the end of the stage. So I've just finished refining all of the shots from scenes 2 and 3 here. Now we have come to the end of the meat of the storyboard and stage of production. Now, the only thing that's left to do using Photoshop before moving to Premiere is we need to export out our storyboard frames that are keyed in our layer comp tabs into JPEGs and save them into a designated folder. So I'm just going to go to File, Export, Layer Comp to Files, give it an appropriate naming convention, hit Browse, and then it'll open a File tab, and I'm going to save it into my allocated folder, BTH, Beyond the Hedges, Files, Scene 3, Save. You want the format for these storyboard frames to be JPEG. Then once you've named and saved it to your allocated file, you just press run. And then frame by frame, Photoshop will export my storyboard frames in order of how they are lined up in the layer comp tab. Once you've exported them, I'm going to check and show you the storyboard frames that have been exported out of Photoshop, now in this allocated folder here. You can also see all the other folders here containing all the shots that make up what I have covered with you in the previous episode, now as finalized storyboards. So now, the storyboard frames are ready to be edited together in Premiere Pro. So let's open up Premiere. So here is Premiere. This is what it looks like once you open it up. This is the most recent updated version I have here. I'm going to start a new project. Project name, we're going to call it Beyond the Hedges, version 001. Okay. So this is my preferred setup here of the main interface of the software. So this box here is where you can import videos or images you wish to utilize in the edits, and any clip you select in this box will be projected in this box above it, where you can freely go through your video of choice and cut out pieces you want to use. Then once you have a piece that you like to cut out and use from said video, you can bring it into this box here, which is the timeline. This is the section of the interface where all the editing is happening, cutting together images along with audio and sound and some temp music. And this box above the timeline box is where it will project what you've got lined up in the timeline. That's very much me letting any beginners out there get an understanding of the basics of the interface. Now, there's a bit of technical stuff in the setup for this new project that we must get right before importing the storyboard frames in here. So I'm going to go to File, New, Sequence, and this will open a window giving us a series of presets. I'm going to go to ARRI, 1080, 24 frames, hit OK. Now, this is set up to 1920 by 1080. Like in Photoshop, I'm just going to change the aspect ratio to my desired CinemaScope aspect ratio. So I'm going to go to Sequence, and this will take me to the sequence settings. As you can see, it says it's set to 1920 by 1080, and I'm going to change this to 4096 by 1714, 24 frames per second, 48,000 hertz. And these here, the video previews, these are just the proxy previews here. You don't really need to do anything with this. So that's the technical stuff done for now, and I think we are set ready to go. So before we begin editing, I'm just going to import my storyboard frames. So first things first is I'm going to create allocated folders in this section here where my storyboard frames will be imported. So I'm going to go to this folder emblem here called New Bin, and when you press it, it will create a folder for you in the import box here. So I'm just going to rename it Scene 001, and this is where I'm going to import all my Scene 1 storyboard frames into, and then add another folder, and the same here, I'm going to rename it Scene 2, and this is where I'll import all my Scene 2 storyboard frames. Likewise, New Bin, rename, Scene 3, and this will be the designated folder for my Scene 3 shots, and so forth. And there's a total of 11 scenes that will be covered in this edit. Now I've created all the number of folders I need, I'm now going to import all my storyboard frames into these folders here. So BTH scenes, and you can see folders inside the main folder containing all the storyboard frames that make up each scene. So we're going to go to the Scene 1 folder, just going to change the layout here to large icon so you can see the frames here. Hold down Alt and highlight all the frames in the scene, press OK, and now you can see the frames have been imported into this folder here in Premiere. we're going to go back out to the main project tab, and now we're going to go into the scene 2 folder next to it and do the same. So go back out to the list of folders here, scene 2, change the icon layout here, Alt, and select all the frames, open, boom, they're in the folder. And same again for the next folder, and I'm going to keep doing this until all my storyboard frames I want to use are in these folders. So I'm just going to time lapse through this. So now all the storyboard frames have been imported into these folders. We are almost set ready to start editing. The only thing we've got left to do is to add the audio recording of the voiceover work that was done in this project and some sound and temp music that I found and gathered from the internet. And on that note, I think this is a good time to wrap up what is part 1 of this episode. And I'll see you guys next week in episode 4, which is a part 2 where we will be going through editing together the storyboards and turning it into an animatic. So stay tuned next time, same bloody channel.